Welcome. I'm Robin Henry, head of the commercial disputes team here at Collier Bristow.
And my name is Abbie Coleman, and I'm an associate in Robin's team.
So in this podcast, we're going to discuss the FCA's new rules and guidance on anti-greenwashing and sustainability, with the latter due to come into effect very shortly on 31st of May.
But before we jump into looking at what the rules and guidance involve, we thought it would first be helpful to briefly run through the background which led to their publication. So the new rules stemmed from the FCA's concerns surrounding customers being able to make informed decisions about products which would meet their sustainability preferences. It has become very common for consumers, both individuals and companies, to factor in ESG and sustainability when deciding which products and services to purchase. The FCA's research actually found that over 80% of customers want their money to do good, as well as to deliver a return. But how products and services are labelled across the market and how valid those labels are is often unclear or inconsistent. The levels of access to information surrounding the sustainability of products and services was also of a concern to the FCA.
Exactly. And that's the key rationale behind the new anti-greenwashing rule, namely to ensure that any sustainability-related claims made by firms about their products and services are fair, clear, and not misleading. The FCA can then use this rule as a basis to challenge firms if it considers they're making misleading sustainability-related claims. The anti-greenwashing rule applies when a firm either communicates with clients in the UK in relation to a product or service, or communicates a financial promotion, or approves a financial promotion for communication to a person in the UK, where there is reference to sustainability characteristics, which can be environmental and or social, of a product or service. The greenwashing rule applies to firms irrespective of whether they are subject to the consumer duty. But those who are subject to the consumer duty will need to do things such as testing their communications and monitoring customer outcomes.
And much like we found when discussing the new Consumer Duty rule, it's not entirely clear yet what the new anti-greenwashing rule looks like in practice. In fact, the main area of feedback following the consultation, which closed back on the 26th of January this year, related to examples given and requests for further clarity on the FCA's expectations. In keeping with the usual messaging of use your own judgment from the FCA, the final report does include some further guidance, but says firms may consider the guidance as appropriate depending on the nature of their business and the sustainability-related claims they make. But this new rule shouldn't be too significant a shift, given that the FCA handbook already required most firms to ensure that any information they communicated is fair, clear, and not misleading. This new anti-greenwashing rule is intended to complement these existing rules, rather than necessarily change them substantially. And the guidance does appear fairly easy to understand and should, in theory, be straightforward to apply. For a sustainability claim to be fair, clear, and not misleading, in accordance with the anti-greenwashing rule, it should be correct and capable of being substantiated, clear and presented in a way that can be understood. It needs to be complete. The firm should not omit or hide important information and should also consider the full life cycle of the product or service. And finally, comparisons to other products or services should be fair and meaningful. So in essence, give consumers the full picture in a way they will understand and make sure that picture is accurate.
And the new anti-greenwashing rule only forms one part of a wider package of measures which are set out in the FCA's new sustainability disclosure requirement and investments labels regime. As I mentioned, the anti-greenwashing rule applies to all FCA authorised firms who make sustainability-related claims about products and services. But the FCA have also introduced investment labels, disclosure and naming and marketing rules that apply to UK asset managers, and targeted rules that apply to distributors of investment products to retail investors in the UK. Now, there are 4 new investment labels that the FCA has created, which firms can begin to use from 31st of July 2024. These are, number one, sustainability focus. A minimum of 70% of that product's assets must be consistent with an aim to invest in assets that are environmentally or socially sustainable, determined using a robust evidence-based standard that is an absolute measure of sustainability. And other assets must not conflict with this standard. Number two, sustainability improvers. The sustainability objective must be consistent with an aim to invest in assets that have the potential to improve environmental or social sustainability over time, again determined using a robust evidence-based standard that is an absolute measure of sustainability. In at number three, sustainability impact. The sustainability objective here must be consistent with an aim to achieve a predefined positive measurable impact in relation to an environmental or social outcome. So this, for example, would be products investing in solutions to problems affecting people or the planet. And last but not least, number four, sustainability mixed goals, a combination of the first three labels. The supporting disclosure in this case must state the proportion of assets invested in accordance with each of those labels. So there are also disclosure requirements to evidence the fact that your product or service meets the criteria of the label you have attached to it.
It's not the simplest to understand, is it? For example, they keep using the term absolute measure. Do you know what the FCA mean by this?
Well, there isn't a definition of what amounts to an absolute measure, but the guidance indicates the FCA expect robust evidence-based disclosure, whereby firms use a methodology or approach that is based on that of an authoritative body, such as a regulator or industry practice. So this is something that's going to be developing over time as evidence is built up in these respects.
So it seems as though some key elements are that it must be clear and able to withstand scrutiny. Is that correct?
Well, it would seem so from the guidance, but again, this is something we hope to get clarity on as these rules come into force and practice.
And to throw one more question at you before we move on to the next part, is one label considered to be better than another?
No, there's no hierarchy between the labels, in that one isn't deemed better than another. They are instead designed to help inform customer decisions when investing. It's going to come down to what the customer values in its investments in terms of which label they are looking for.
Thank you, Robin. So turning now to the disclosures, and in the spirit of consistent numbering, there are 4 of these as well. First, consumer-facing disclosures. Second, pre-contractual disclosures. Third, ongoing product-level disclosures. And fourth, entity-level disclosures. Now, we're going to be focusing on consumer-facing disclosures today, as that stems directly from the wider concerns that we spoke about at the start of this podcast. Firms will be expected to produce, in a new standalone document that's separate to the usual key investor information, a summary of the product's key sustainability characteristics. This requirement applies to products with one of the 4 labels, but also to those without labels where sustainability-related terms are used to promote them. Now, there's no set template for the consumer-facing disclosures, but there are key features that must be included. It must be located in a prominent place on the relevant digital medium through which the product is offered, and hard copies must be made available on request. It must confirm the product's sustainability objective and label, or clarify that it doesn't have a label. It must set out details of the investment policy and strategy, including what the product will or won't invest in. And it must set out the relevant metrics that have been used to measure this. All consumer-facing disclosures must be reviewed and updated annually as appropriate. And where the product does have a label, any such update should reflect the progress towards achieving the relevant sustainability objective.
So it's a broad package of measures, as you can see, and the final policy statement is 200 pages long. But that's only a brief overview of some of the key features of the new rules. So in terms of a timeline, what we've got is 31st of May 2024, the anti-greenwashing rule comes into force. 31st of July this year, firms can begin to use labels with accompanying disclosures. Then on the 2nd of December this year, naming and marketing rules come into force with accompanying disclosures. A year later, 2nd of December 2025, ongoing product level and entity level disclosures for firms with assets under management of over 50 billion. And then finally, on the 2nd of December 2026, entity level disclosure rules are extended to firms with assets under management of over £5 billion. So those who are likely to be impacted by these new rules need to ensure they understand at least the more immediate elements first, but also need to remain conscious that there are going to be subsequent developments so that they can get ahead of the game.
I completely agree. Now, for those of you that have been listening, all of the guidance that we have mentioned in this podcast can be found on the FCA's website. And of course, if you are in need of any advice, please do not hesitate to reach out to our team here at Collier Bristow.
Thank you very much for listening.